So Lex Libertas has recently announced the Lex Libertas Club, which of course is a platform through which contributors of Lex Libertas and members of the public can become more actively involved with our work. We are very excited about this. We are very excited about the prospects of rolling out this initiative and getting more people on board. And to talk about that today, with me in studio is Aldo Landsberg, who reached out to us. Aldo, thank you very much for being in the studio.
Ernst, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, first of all, thank you for reaching out to us and also declaring your willingness to become more actively involved. And we've had some great conversations, some great meetings in terms of what we plan on doing. But before we talk about that, let's just talk about you. So as we're recording this, it's about a week or so since you officially became an advocate in South Africa. So congratulations.
Thank you.
But yeah, tell us more about who you are, where you're from, and why you are here.
Yeah, just for technicality, otherwise some people are going to be very mad at me. I passed my exams, so I'm just waiting for the formal conversion. So for the technical, all intents and purposes, I'm still a pupil advocate. But that should change by 4 November.
Okay.
Born and raised in a small town just outside of Pretoria, Bronkhorstspruit. I was in school, high school here in Pretoria, and then I went on to study in the best university in South Africa, University of the Free
Pretoria.
State. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny that you said that because I don't think either of these two are still the best university in South Africa.
Ironically so, yes.
But I remember studying at the University of Pretoria, the rivalry between the different universities in terms of which one is best.
Absolutely.
And so the joke, it turns out that the one university that was picked on the most was the Puka, Northwest University. That was at least our
rightfully
perspective.
so.
Yeah. So the joke was that an LLB at the University of Pretoria is so good, it's on par with an LLM at the Northwest University. But the Northwest University students vehemently disagreed. But COFSIS was indeed a good university for law. And so let's talk about your studies firstly. So I remember doing my LLB. What annoyed me was that there's like all these different subjects and you have to learn everything. And so at least from my degrees, and I really mean it when I say that my postgraduate degrees to me was much easier than my actual LLB. But in terms of the law itself, what is it that sort of struck you about the law, why you decided to study law, but also going forward, how do you see your path in terms of the law?
Yeah, so with regards to the law, I think it's a very cliche thing to say, but in my case, that was really, really what happened. The law chose me. It was a sort of a situation where I applied for a bunch of other directions to study in. And the only door that opened or stayed open with technicalities was the law. And I went to COFSIS, not really, I mean, you know what a lawyer is by looking at suits, television shows, but I really didn't know. And I went and never looked back. I think I see my future, obviously, as an advocate in practice. The law is extremely wide, like you obviously know. There's a lot of possibilities in the academic world for the law. But yeah, I see myself as staying in practice.
So when we started Lex Libertas, you reached out to me, I think, through Instagram initially. And you said that you would like to become more actively involved. Why? Why was that the case?
I feel, well, in South Africa, we're in a position where we are fed a narrative and we are forced into the narrative. And everyone is too scared to say and do what they think is right. And in plain terms, you can't complain about our country and do nothing about it. We have to take action. And I want to take action.
And you experience also that there's this narrative about developments in South Africa. There's this narrative that we, especially young people growing up, what they are taught in school and what they are taught in university, and ideologically we sort of have to toe the line But realistically, we increasingly experience that reality is completely different from what this narrative is. Is that an accurate way to describe it?
I think that's a very good way to describe it. I think what we see in the media, I think what we see from politics and politicians and how they want to portray the feeling on the ground is not what we experience as young people. The racial division that they want to portray and instill in us is not what I feel when I walked on campus, when I have conversations with other cultural or racial groups, and that started to irritate me, quite frankly, and it's straightforward. And I want to be a voice or help be a voice to break that narrative, and to show people that's not how it is generally, day to day.
I think there are two sort of extreme narratives on racial dynamics in South Africa. The one is that white people and black people or people from different races are just on the verge of a race war. You know, we despise each other, and whenever we see each other, there's just conflict. And you sort of get that impression if you go on social media or at least on X. I once asked ChatGPT, I think, name some prominent people in South Africa who have said that the country is on the verge of a race war. And there's like 100 people who have said this, university professors and politicians and journalists. It's sort of a narrative that we're on the verge of a race war. But the reality is completely different. But I think then the other extreme is to try to present South Africa as if there are no cultural differences. We're all just South Africans. And it's just one homogeneous whole, when the reality is that there are different communities, different cultures, different languages. But that doesn't mean that the existence of different communities or different nations in South Africa doesn't mean that they necessarily want to be at war with each other, but rather that they want to respect and cooperate with each other.
Absolutely, and I think I pin a lot of that on the existence even. I want to go as far as to say of social media. Because if you look at social media and just how an algorithm works, I mean, I'm no IT expert, but there are billions of posts per day. And what we see and what goes viral are the extremes.
Yeah.
The worst of the worst, it's clickbait. The worst of the worst, the most bad of the most bad, that's all that people see because that's what everyone clicks on. And that is what goes viral. And that is what people then think the feeling on the ground is. That's what people think people or diverse groups feel about one another. And that's just not true. Yeah.
And I've experienced that once, or I have a particular anecdote on that, is as I sit here, I find it difficult to think of an example in my life where I experienced racism from a random black person in the street. I experienced it on social media all the time. And I have experienced it going to court cases, like politically charged court cases with the EFF, and then people would chant things. But just going to a shopping mall, I don't think I've ever experienced that kind of racism. But what's remarkable is I have experienced it in the United States. I was on a bus in public transport, and this random person came up to me and started slurring me because of my skin color. And it was remarkable to think that I'm from South Africa, and I don't experience this in my daily life in South Africa, but I experience it coming to America. So it's almost as if on ground level, race relations in America is worse than in South Africa. But in South Africa, you could say vertically it's worse. In other words, in terms of the policies that are enforced by the government, the race laws, the BEE, and so forth. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense. I think in South Africa, like you said, rightfully so, the only places where you really experience it is when people actively decide to weaponize it in a certain situation, like, for example, in a court case or political-wise.
Or in the media.
In the media. Yeah. I think as South Africans, especially the younger generation, our default setting is not racial tension. It's the only places I've experienced it surfacing is, like I said, when people actively make the decision to use it as a shield or a defense mechanism or an attack.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk to you a little bit about BEE because it's a topic that is it has become one of the defining features of South Africa.
Yes.
Which is ironic in the sense that it's not really in the Constitution. If you read the Constitution, nowhere does it say we should have BEE. There's some vague references to measures should be taken to address historical injustices, but the context is always to promote equality, to move towards non-racialism. And there's, of course, a constitutional debate there, or a very important constitutional lesson to be learned there is, at the end of the day, it's about how do we interpret the Constitution. But broadly speaking, not so much from a technical legal perspective, what's your view on BEE in South Africa?
So, for a quick intro, I think BEE began with a promise. And I think it was a noble promise, theoretically. It was to right the wrongs of apartheid and open the doors that has been locked for many generations. But unfortunately, in practice, such as many things in the law, practice and theory differs night and day, and BEE became a political theatre. I think it turned into a moral shield that the government or the political parties can use to shield them, and as a convenient story that keeps emotional loyalty intact for their followers, even as the country crumbles. The ANC or the government or the people that weaponizes BEE essentially says that you are not struggling because we failed, because that's the truth. You're struggling because white monopoly capital still holds you back. And that's a dangerous road to go down. I mean, we're seeing that firsthand. There's a very, very nice story that I read in a very dark book. I think we discussed it as well on our first meeting, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Yeah. And I read this, and this is one of the laws to create power dynamics. And why I say it's a dark book, it's manipulation to the max.
Very Machiavellian.
Very much so. They call Robert Greene the modern Machiavellian. Yeah. And a lot of the laws you have to read, not to implement it yourself, but to see how it is being used against you. And this is a perfect example. And it's the parable of Bragadino. Apologize if I'm butchering the name or the pronunciation. But he was a gentleman in the 1500s in Venice. And Venice was collapsing. And the people wanted to restore it to its former glory. And then Bragadino arrived from Cyprus. And he called himself an alchemist.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And he promised the leaders of Venice that he can make gold out of base metals. So in other words, he told the rulers of Venice, don't worry, there's no hard reforms, there's no discipline, there's no hard work necessary to restore this beautiful Venice of yours back to its former glory. We can do it overnight with my magical alchemy. And they gave him a place. They gave him a castle. They paid with their tax monies. He got servants. And he stayed there for years under the guise of testing his formula. And each time that people started to get squeamish or ask questions, he just doubled down on his lie and saying, but we're testing the formula. And the longer you wait, the more it's going to come back to you. The more gold you're going to get because I'm perfecting this formula. And obviously, eventually, they found out about his lie and he got executed. Now, the problem here, and why I'm telling you this, is that ANC is now South Africa's Bragadino, and alchemy is BEE. It's exactly the same lie. It's exactly the same lie and principle that the ANC follows to keep their people loyal. And I think we are now at a turning point where people are starting to see and realize the lie. And like Bragadino, they are facing execution.
It's very comparable because the failure is quite evident, or the non-existence of the solution, and we should just wait. And part of the argument behind BEE was it's going to promote equality, and of course employment and so forth. It's going to eradicate poverty. When all of these things, the exact opposite is happening. Poverty is increasing, unemployment is increasing, even inequality. If you just look at the Gini coefficient, the country is more unequal now than it was when they started with this. And when you criticize it, it's very like the story of Bragadino. So the response is just be patient. We need to double down. And it's the same with land reform in South Africa, where according to the government's own statistics, 90% of farms that they have transferred or transformed through land reform projects have failed, with commercial farms becoming subsistence farms or subsistence farms becoming squatter camps. And the solution is just double down on this policy, just be patient. And if you are not patient, then you are the problem. And It's remarkable.
And now that you speak about the effects of BEE and the numbers, unemployment, that's one of the main reasons. You asked me why I went into law, and the real reason is I hate numbers. And every time I hear numbers, I like to find tangible examples and see how these numbers really look in context. Because sometimes we hear all these numbers and the millions and billions of rands that we lose, and we don't really realize exactly how much money this is. Yeah. So I have a few examples, just quick examples if I can show you.
I just want to add quickly before you say that, and it's very important because it's sort of a psychological phenomenon that if you hear today 100,000 rand was stolen, and if I hear 100 million rand was stolen, I'm not going to be much more emotionally upset about 100 million as you are about 100,000. It's just numbers. It becomes abstract. And
it happens so often we're desensitized by this point. Yeah. We read over it.
Yeah.
And I think, for example, if we look at the BEE compliance measures and what economists say, they say between 1.5 and 3% per year, the private sector loses because of these BEE compliances. Now, that's roughly 150 to 300 billion. Okay. Now, this is another number that we just read over. Let me put this into context. What 300 billion rand annually for our private sector means. 300 billion rand could build more than 2 million RDP, so fully subsidized houses. 2 million.
That's incredible.
Another context for this, that means it's enough houses to house every single family in Cape Town and Durban combined. All of the families per year. Another example, it can pave 150,000 kilometers of road. Okay? To put that in context again, that's enough tar to resurface every major highway from Johannesburg to Cairo. Cairo is not a little town in the Free State that you haven't heard about. Egypt. The entire continent of Africa. If you stack 300 billion rand in 200 rand notes on top of one another, it will reach halfway to the International Space Station. That is what BEE is costing South Africa per year in the private sector. And now we are wondering why our unemployment rates are 32.9% and 45% for the youth. Can I put that for you into context?
Please do.
32. Let's work on 32%. So 33% because it's 32.9. During the Great Depression in the United States, unemployment peaked at 24%. In Germany, in the 1930s, late 1930s, just before Hitler's mobilization, it hit 30 to 35%. So that means our country's status quo, not the Great Depression, not during a world war, is higher than that of the United States and Germany during these time periods. That's scary.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And what's worse is it's caused predominantly by policies like BEE, and we are told that that's the solution. That's what we need to do to get out of this, when it's actually what has caused the problem.
Doubling down on the lies.
It's remarkable. It's very Orwellian. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
So if we shift slightly, I want to talk to you about the checks and balances, which is, of course, a topic that as a law student, people talk about it all the time, and in politics, and a lot of people don't really necessarily understand what it is. But the idea was, broadly speaking, that during the 90s, there were some concerns, at least in the South African context. The idea is that there were some concerns about what the new South Africa would look like, and would the South African government be able to govern responsibly. And theoretically, the response to that is yes, because the constitutional framework should include checks and balances. Mm-hmm. In other words, measures that are put in place to ensure that the government is accountable, and that in as far as they are not, that there are consequences. And checks and balances could include many things. It could include courts, the fact that there is separation of powers between the executive power, the legislative power, and the judiciary. It could include things like a judicial service commission to ensure that the right people become judges, that there's no political interference, and so forth, and so forth. And then in our context, especially the Chapter 9 institutions in South Africa, which are the Human Rights Commission, the Public Protector, the Section 185 Commission, which has a very long formal name, but it's generally called the CRL Commission.
Auditor General.
Auditor General, yeah, exactly. And so I want to talk to you about a little bit about those, and broadly speaking, your view, and then we can zoom in perhaps on the CRL Commission, because it's something that we've been talking about.
Yeah, if I can use another analogy, I think the easiest way to describe these checks and balances is like every good game needs a referee, and people who blow the whistle when someone cheats. And that's essentially what these Chapter 9 institutions were created to do, and also to make sure that there's never a time again in our country that power is being abused. And ironically again, this has been turned on its head. So where these institutions have been put in place to protect the people from the state, it's now protecting the state from the people. And that is what we're moving towards. It's a very difficult situation.
And so this one example, a recent example, is the CRL Commission, which is actually probably the least known among those commissions. But it's supposed to be the commission that ensures that communities are protected, especially minorities. And this new idea by the commission was that they want to regulate churches and they want to regulate theology, because they want to make sure that what people learn in church and what they practice in church, at least that's the way they frame it, complies with the South African Constitution. What's your view on that?
Ernst, this is a real bizarre idea. If we go back to why the CRL Rights Commission has been established, it's a body under, like you said, Section 185, but it was established exactly for the reason to protect minority groups and religion and culture and languages. And we can go into that with the language as well. But I think the religious part now is important to discuss, because the idea to try and regulate faith and religion instead of protecting it is very scary. And the reason I'm saying that, it's going to come quietly as we are trying to protect you. And there needs to be some sort of, it's going to be accountability. But my problem here is accountable to who? Whom?
Exactly.
The definition of religion is accountability to God and not man. So you see the bizarre situation that this creates. I think this relates to a conversation that we also had, where I went for an interview at an institution, political institution, and during the application process, it's a long application process, you have to do a few rounds, and there's tests, multiple choice questions and essays you have to fill in, where they then ask you, what do you think reigns supreme, God's law or the Constitution? Now, I just want to make clear here, and I want to be very careful of how I phrase this, because I swore an oath to protect the Constitution. And I'm not saying to do away with the Constitution. I'm just saying that to place the Constitution as a document that created morality is incorrect. It only codified it. To place the document above the moral foundations, we believe, or the moral compass, we as Christians believe it's God's law, God's literal law, the Bible. But if you are not a Christian, then it's your moral compass, or what you believe in, your moral belief between right and wrong. To place that above the document, the document above this, does not make sense. This is what gave birth to the document. It's like saying the mirror is more important than the face it reflects. Doesn't make sense. And it's a very dangerous road to go down. I mean, if we look at history and where faith has been regulated like this, Communist China, pastors must register to preach, and they can only preach from state-approved Bibles. If we look at Soviet Russia, churches were tolerated as long as they praised the party and reported unpatriotic believers. And even Nazi Germany, we know a Reich Church was created to make Christianity compatible. They rewrote hymns or new hymns to remove Jewish names. And once we go down this line, control is being masked as accountability.
Exactly. It was one of the defining features of the French Revolution too, is targeting churches. And because the concern was exactly this that you are pointing out now, that churches and religion has a built-in sense of authority, and totalitarian regimes see that as a threat. And they want to have absolute control, and they don't want citizens to have a sense of authority that is outside of the state and outside of what they want people to be accountable to. And so I think it's a very dangerous path once we start going down this route of targeting churches. And I think we as the public should know if this is something that the South African government wants to do, it's worth taking a very strong stance on this. So to close off, and there's much that we can talk about on this, but just to bring it back to Lex Libertas and our vision towards a viable political dispensation for South Africa, and you becoming involved, what would your message be to other people, especially younger people, in terms of whether they should become involved or not?
I think it's very simple and straightforward. We can't complain if we're not trying to do anything to the contrary. This is the perfect place where we, as young people, can come to get educated. You will also, I believe, talk a little bit about the book club and everything that entails. But this is where we can come as young people to firstly learn and then make a difference, to be a part of something bigger, and to create an alternative opportunity where in times like this, we often don't see one.
Aldo Landsberg, thank you very much. Good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you.